Morning, friends. We like to. Is the volume okay? My voice isn't normal this morning. Is that all right? You can hear me in the back?
A little louder would be better.
A little louder? You have to turn me up a little. How about that? Is that better now? Good? Okay. Okay, so we like to give the impression that the Bible is a.
Voice.
So we, as Christians, like to give the impression that the Bible is a clean book, that it contains no contradictions, that it raises no moral conundrums. But when we read the New Testament, we don't even make it past the story of Christmas to see that that just isn't so. Picking up where we left off last Sunday, we read in Matthew chapter 2 that when they had gone. So this episode that we're working through this morning takes place immediately following the visit of the wise men, which must have been a source of tremendous encouragement to the young Mary and Joseph. Up until this point in the story, they've been given a lot of information to process. They've both been told on separate occasions that their newborn child is going to be special. They've both been told that he's going to be the Messiah. They've both been told that he's going to be the Saviour of the world. And I don't know, but I would imagine that when an angel appears to you in a dream and tells you stuff like that, it's got to cross your mind on at least a few occasions that you might need to take more pills. Right? You might be and are probably going slightly mad. And so this episode where the three wise men come, the profoundly powerful and intelligent men from the East who understand what's going on in the world, who understand the movement of the stars, who understand the role that those things play in the fates of men. That visit must have confirmed to them that everything they'd heard over the preceding 9 months was true. And as they heard the things that the wise men had to say, as they received the gifts that the wise men had to give, it must have been so uplifting for the young, hitherto slightly mad Mary and Joseph, that this child really was the Messiah, that he really was the King of the Jews. However, and here we get into the dirtiness of the tale, any encouragement that Mary and Joseph got from the three wise men, notice, was short-lived. Matthew says that an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream. "Get up," he said, "take this child and its mother and escape to Egypt and stay there till I tell you, for Herod is going to search for the child to kill him." Now, in this sentence, the word escape is written as an imperative. In other words, the angel is saying, get up, not in the morning, not in 2 hours' time, but right now, because your life is in danger. Now, our sentimental, pleasure-loving, greedy, is that for me?
That's for your water.
Thank you. It's just water? I know you're packing more than that. Okay. Now, bless you. Our pleasure-loving, ease-addicted, fat, greedy North American lifestyle emotionally disconnects us from the darkness of this story. Our idea of having a bad day is when the server gets our coffee order wrong, or when our commute to work is slightly slower than usual. However, that would not have been true for Matthew's original audience. Matthew's first century readers lived in a dangerous world. They knew what it was firsthand to have to get up in the wee hours of the night and leave, for their lives were in danger. And the place to which Joseph is told to flee, you will notice, is Egypt. For about 1,500 years at this point, Egypt had been the natural place of refuge for everyone in Palestine who was having a difficult time and was in danger. Some of the oldest and earliest and saddest stories in the Bible are stories about people leaving Palestine for the relative safety of Egypt for reasons of hardship and difficulty. And so therefore in almost every city in Egypt there was always large populations of Jews. For example, around about the time of Jesus, the city of Alexandria had a Jewish population of around about 1 million. So anyway, they go down to Egypt as refugees. And you'll be interested to know, at least I'm interested to know, that at this point, some of the early non-Christian Christmas stories go crazy with embellishments. So things called like the Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Philip, the so-called secret Gospels that you've probably heard of. At this point, they really go overboard. Some of them say things like, the dragons of Egypt bowed down to Jesus. One story says that when baby Jesus entered Egypt, all of the idols of Egypt crashed to the ground in worship before him. And I mention that because some people at your work probably talk about these secret gospels and they say, what about that, what about that? And what's interesting about all that stuff is that the non-Christian Christmas stories paint a picture of Jesus that isn't human. They paint a picture of Jesus that is very otherworldly, very immune from the disappointments, from the sadnesses, from the pains, from the challenges of real life. Contrast all of that nonsense with how unspectacular this information in the Christmas story is. In verse 14, we're simply told that Joseph took the child and his mother during the night and left for Egypt. There's no special favors here. There's just a dad waking his family up in the wee small hours of the morning and running away for their lives. A man who had to give up his livelihood. A man who, when he got this bad news, now has to wonder things like, how am I going to pay the bills? How am I going to provide for my children? How am I going to make it through the next week, the next 6 months, the next year? And I like this detail of the Christmas story because in our culture, we often feel that we're missing out on Christmas if our lives are less than perfect. It's very easy, I think, to get sucked into the idea that you're a bad father if you can't buy all the things for your children that other fathers buy for theirs. It's very easy to persuade yourself that you're a bad mother if Christmases at your house aren't as special as they are in the homes of your friends. And yet, from the perspective of the Bible, your present struggles do not alienate you from the Christmas story. They connect you to it. You are never closest to the true story of Christmas when your livelihood is uncertain, when your only hope for the coming months and years is a wing and a prayer. And of course, as Matthew writes this detail about Jesus' childhood, he is aware of the fact that later in life, Jesus did not live well. Jesus, remember, it is said in the Gospels, lived basically as a homeless person. He had nowhere to lay his head. He had to permanently rely on the charity and the goodwill of others. Then at the end of verse 14, Matthew does something rather strange. Notice what he says. He says that Joseph got up, took the child with his mother during the night and left for Egypt, where he stayed until the death of Herod. And then he says, and so was fulfilled what the Lord had said through the prophet, out of Egypt I called my son. Now the prophet in question is Hosea. It was Hosea in the Old Testament through whom God said, out of Egypt I called my son. And the reason I say that is strange is because when Hosea spoke these words some centuries earlier, he wasn't thinking about the future. He wasn't thinking about a Messiah or Jesus being born in Bethlehem. Rather, he was thinking about the past, about a time when God delivered his people from slavery in Egypt. And it's a beautiful story. It's filled with pathos and emotion. So the story of Hosea in a nutshell is this. Hosea is, in the Bible, he's a good man who married the wrong woman. I don't know if you can relate to that or not. Please don't look at them right now. It's just going to make it awkward. So this is Hosea. He's a good man who marries the wrong woman. And he doesn't just marry the wrong woman for him. He marries the wrong woman. Her story is one of bad decision after bad decision after bad decision. And each bad decision makes her life increasingly uglier and more desperate. And by the midpoint of the story, her desperation is such that she finds herself selling her body for money. And then she further finds herself being owned by a pimp who sells her out at auction. And from a male perspective, there is a lot of sadness in that story. I mean, here you are, right? You're a good man. You're not perfect, but you're good. And you always try to do the right thing. You always try to take care of your family, to work hard, to provide, to love with the best of your ability. And what do you get for your trouble? You get a woman like this, who not only ruins her life, but yours, and also the lives of your children. So how do you feel as a man? Well, you feel a lot of things. You feel disrespected, you feel angry, you feel hurt, you feel abused. And it doesn't matter how good you are or how patient you are, eventually you will run out of goodness and you will run out of patience with your no-good wife. But in the story of Hosea, towards the end, this good man gets word of his wife's latest crash. She's now been misbehaving for so long that she's lost that thing that once allowed her to sell her body. And so she finds herself at the end at a slave auction, being sold to the highest bidder, probably for not very much. And in a beautiful, tear-jerking moment, Hosea gets his kids dressed up, and the kids ask, "Daddy, where are we going today?" And Hosea says, "We're going to get Mum, and we're going to bring her home, and we're going to pay whatever the price is, and we're going to take her back into the house. We're going to get Mum back. We're going to get, my wife back. We're going to get the past back, and there is hope, and there is a new beginning. And out of this nasty, terrible, pain-filled, hopeless situation, today at the lowest point we find ourselves with hope. So let's get down to the auction and let's buy her back and bring her home." And this act of incredible love in the Hosea story is God's way of talking about how he feels towards his people. When the Bible says, "Out of Egypt I called my son," it's the Bible's way of saying, when you've gotten yourself into a mess of your own making, or when you find yourself in a mess that's not of your making, I'm always there to call you out with new hope and a new beginning and a newfound optimism. And I don't just call you out of that hope, I make it possible. The first time I ever told the story of Hosea in a public place was in a room full of prostitutes, funnily enough. So I used to work every Friday night and early into Saturday morning in a cafe in the red light district of Glasgow. Very horrible place. Glasgow, even the nice parts of Glasgow are pretty sketchy. The bad parts are extra sketchy. And so, a group of people bought this old cafe, and it was right in the middle of the red light district. And so, all throughout their shift, when these poor girls were doing the things they did, they would come in for some respite, for some tea, some coffee, some cakes. We used to give tarts to tarts. I always thought it was ironic. And anyway, at the end of the night, when the shift was over, someone would always get handed a Bible and be asked to say a few words. And more often than not, because I was the new guy, they would throw the Bible at me asked me to say something. And so I told the story of Hosea, and I told the story about this woman who had ruined her own life. And after bad choice upon bad choice, she finds herself at rock bottom at the end of it all. And right at rock bottom, she is told that God loves her. And that God offers her a way out and a new life. And I'm not going to lie, I told the story real good. And there wasn't a dry eye in the house that night. It was such a beautiful, I've been speaking for 22 years, and I think that's probably the highest point of my career. It was a beautiful, beautiful night in a dark and dirty place. And that's the effect that Matthew intends to have when he mentions this "out of Egypt I called my son" thing. He's saying this is what Jesus will be about. He will be the one through whom God will offer hope. He will be the one through whom God will shine a light in a dark and a horrible place. Next sentence. When Herod realized that he had been outwitted by the Magi, he was furious. And he gave orders to kill all the boys in Bethlehem and its vicinity who were 2 years old and under. So, don't look at me, look at the screen, look at what that says. He wanted to kill all the boys in Bethlehem who were 2 years old and younger. Now that's not a problem, right? It's not a problem. I'll tell you why. Because this is a story, thus far at least, about a God who intervenes to save babies from the murderous actions of an evil king, right? Just like a couple of verses ago, there was this angel of the Lord, yeah? And he showed up and he said to this young family with a young baby, you gotta go because someone's going to hurt your baby. And the angel saved the baby. God sent the angel to save the baby. That's what this is about. This is a story about a God who sends angels to save babies. And now here we are a few verses later. There's some more babies in need of saving. So I read this story at this point with a little bit of, this is going to be fine, because God's in the saving baby business. God's in the business of the bad guys don't win, and the good guys always do. Given the population of Bethlehem in the first century, I'm going to take a stab and say that we're probably talking about 20 families here. We're talking about 20 young children who have yet to walk, yet to talk, and evil is out to get them. And yet in this case, there is no angel. In this case, there is no God in the saving babies business. In this case, God does not intervene. In this case, the babies die. This story raises a moral conundrum. The God who intervenes to save some does not intervene to save all. I was reminded of this week. I was following the story, as I'm sure you were, about the volcano in New Zealand, and there was a family, a boyfriend and girlfriend, I think, from Brazil, evidently quite church-going people, and they got off the volcano just before it erupted, and they saw the whole thing unfold from the safety of the boat. And in talking about it, they expressed how thankful they were to God. They expressed how grateful they were that God got them out of it. And I'm not going to take that away from them, but for me that raises a question. What about all the other guys? What about the guys who God didn't get out of it? Who didn't make it to the safety of the boat? It is a troubling fact that for every prayer that God answers, There are many that he doesn't. We wish that we lived in a world where bad things did not happen to good people, but we don't. We wish that we lived in a world where bad things didn't happen at all, but we don't. We live in a world where misfortune and tragedy and disappointment can interrupt your life without a moment's notice. And we worship a God who does not prevent all of our tears all of the time, but who instead simply cries along with us. Next sentence. Then what was said through the prophet Jeremiah was fulfilled. A voice is heard in Ramah, weeping in great mourning. Rachel weeping for her children and refusing to be comforted, for they are no more. So Rachel is a heroine of the Old Testament and a heroine of the Jewish people. And she was buried just outside Bethlehem. And according to legend, whenever the people of God would be taken captive as prisoners, whenever they would be taken into exile, they would be filed past the grave of Rachel. And according to Jewish legend, Rachel would weep from beyond the grave for the plight of her own people. And yet, listen carefully, pregnant in the fact of exile is the possibility of return. Pregnant in the fact of bad news is the possibility of good news. Pregnant in every feeling of pain that you have and every tear that you cry is the possibility of a time yet to come where there is no more pain and no more tears. Pregnant in the frustrations of today is a cry from the deep places of the soul that a day is coming when it will get better. And it won't be like this. And it won't be like this. And it won't be like this. At least that is biblically true of the tears of Rachel. So while 20 families cry, one family survives. And then we are told that after Herod died, an angel of the Lord appeared in a dream to Joseph and said, "Get up." And I always feel bad for Joseph, by the way. Like, he's a working man, he's busy, he's stressed out, he's got a lot on his mind. Can the angel not wait till morning? Do you know what I mean? Like, let me lie in. Anyway, get up, take the child and his mother, and go to the land of Israel. For those who are trying to take the child's life are dead. And then we are told that Joseph got up, took the child with his mother, and went to the land of Israel. But when he heard that Archelaus was reigning in Judea in place of his father Herod, he was afraid to go there. Now, with good reason. So when Herod died in 4 BC, his kingdom was divided between his sons. And the bit of Israel, Judea, was given to Herod's son Archelaus. And Archelaus, according to the history books, was just a nutcase, total whack job. Unpredictable, violent, volatile. He was so violent that even the violence-loving Romans said, "Whoa, dude, you're over the top." And so they sent him to live in exile in Austria, where he spent the last days of his life enjoying strudel and things like this. And so after that, Judea becomes a Roman province. Anyway, that's not relevant. What is relevant is this. Joseph has been having a hard time for the past few years, yeah? Joseph's been through a lot. Like, plan A is gone. And so now Joseph gets some good news. And so Joseph, he's a man, he's got a young family. What does he need to do? Put bread on the table. He's from Bethlehem. So his plan is to go to Bethlehem. He's got connections in Bethlehem. He's got business in Bethlehem. He's got land in Bethlehem. In Bethlehem, Joseph can pick himself up again. In Bethlehem, Joseph can start again. In Bethlehem, Joseph can make it. But now, plan B is gone. I mean, the guy just can't catch a break. And so we're told that having been warned in a dream, he withdrew to the district of Galilee and went and lived in a town called Nazareth. Now we know about Nazareth because we're Christians, but in the first century no one knew about Nazareth. In the first century, Nazareth is a small, desperate, dirty town. But what is interesting about Nazareth is it's just a few miles away from the very important city of Sepphoris. And what's important about Sepphoris is that a few years before the Christmas story, the people of Sepphoris rebelled against Roman rule. So a Roman general, Varus, descends into Israel from Syria with 2 legions and burns Sepphoris to the ground. Now think about it. When you have a massive city that's been destroyed, what needs to happen to the city next? You need to build stuff again. So there's going to be lots of jobs in construction. What business is Joseph in? He's in the construction business. He's a carpenter. So he thinks to himself, plan A is gone, plan B is gone, but I can go up there to this one-horse town and I'll find some work. I'll get something to do rebuilding the city of Sepphoris. That's true from an economic human perspective. Here's what's going on from a biblical perspective. Matthew is careful to note that Jesus is being raised in Nazareth was a fulfillment of what was said through the prophets. He will be called a Nazarene. Listen carefully. The Hebrew word Nazar, Nazar, is a word that is used in the Bible to talk about what happens when you cut down a tree and the tree looks dead. The tree looks gone. All that remains of the tree is a stump. You think it's over. You think it's the end. And then in the spring, you see this little shoot poking up through the stump you thought was dead. And that little shoot of new life reminds you that there is hope. There is life that emerges from darkness. Always. And that is the meaning of the biblical word Nazar, Nazarene. There is always a God who is taking the story of life to a place of which it is said, there is no mourning, there is no pain, there is no death. So what is the moral of this story that we don't like to talk about at Christmas? Well, we might say that bad things do happen to good people. They just do. That is an unavoidable and undesirable fact of life. We might also say that bad things are sometimes done by good people. The Herod in this story is the king of the Jews. He's supposed to be a good guy, and in many ways he was a good guy. He tried to do the right thing by his people, but he was nonetheless capable of enormous evil. We might also say that it is normal for God to let bad things happen. God is nowhere near as interventionist as we would wish him to be. In this story, for every child that lived, 20 died. For every prayer that God answers, there are many that he does not. And where we might say, and should in honesty say, all of those things, we must also say, with a defiant gleam in our eye and an incongruous spring in our step, that whilst pain and heartache and fear and danger and disappointment and difficulty are an inevitable and unavoidable fact of life, none of those things are ever the final word on life. There is hope. There is hope. There is always hope. And it is stubborn. And it is defiant. And it never ever quits. And it never ever gives up. And hope has a way of finding a way, of working through the cracks, and poking its head up through the deadness, and reminding you that life is resilient and amazing, and that God is in it all. Not just the plan A, but the plan B, and the plan C, and the plan Z, or whatever plan you're currently working on. God bless you. Thank you for listening. See you next time.